I will stay optimistic and hopeful. And I want to go back more into the details of your story. I mentioned I was going to ask the question of what your experience of ECT was like. So can you describe that? Like, what is that process like? What does it feel like? Are you conscious while it's happening? What are the effects of it?
Oh, well, thank God you're not conscious while it's happening. I think in the beginning, in the 30s, people were conscious. And according to some of the research I've done in India, they still sometimes practice it without anesthesia, but they need a whole team of people to hold the person's body down and restrict them and everything else. The process, uh, you go to a hospital. I was an outpatient, and my doctor did a process where you would give anesthesia and you would do 4 shocks. So I had 7 treatments, which would equal 28 distinct treatments. And I just I chose that because I thought there's no way I can keep going and going and going. It was so anxiety producing. And I was just starting to write at the time, just starting to find my voice as a writer. And I thought, I don't want to lose my memory because I saw my mother lose a lot of her memory. And so you go to a hospital, you get dressed in the clothes, they take you into the operating room. They wrap your one of your legs in a tourniquet so they give you a muscle paralyzer, but they want to monitor the seizure. And one of the ways they monitor the seizure is by looking at your toes. And that's why they put a tourniquet on your leg.
Hmm.
And after they give you that sedation, you just wake up in the recovery room and you're kind of in a fog and at least I did. I had a headache on top of the other headache I already had. So I
Mm,
had a post ECT headache. And
mm.
then before ECT, they give you a memory test because they want to have a baseline. So it's kind of silly stuff like count backwards from 100 by 7 and take this piece of paper and put it on the floor and then pick it up and draw a house. I mean, it's a really weird test. And then they give you that after you have the ECT, and I guess they compare how your memory is. But so for whatever that's worth,
Mhm.
I don't know what it really shows.
How
But
sp how spread out were the 7 different treatments of 4 shocks?
over a couple of years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what effects did you notice?
I didn't notice a whole lot. There would be times when I felt really good, but again, it was very short-lived, and I was still on all the psychiatric drugs.
Yeah.
And one time I had a treatment and I slept for a whole week afterwards, and I thought that I was just so depressed that I was sleeping, but as I now I wonder, and I think it's possible that I had some kind of brain trauma because excessive sleeping can be a sign of brain trauma. And it would make sense in a so called treatment like that with 4 shocks that I would possibly have brain trauma.
Right. And I see how when there are so many factors affecting you, when you're on multiple drugs and you're doing that treatment, that it becomes impossible to determine what the effect of any one of those variables is anymore, just because it's this kind of storm of factors. Um, yeah, wow, so interesting. So then, can you take us to that the time period when you started coming off the drugs and when you started feeling better, and can you highlight what were the most important things for you to get better?
Oh my goodness. Which getting better, like getting better out of depression or getting better getting off the drugs?
Good question. So remind us of like the timeline.
Okay, so
When
in
you
from 93 to 97, I experienced depression, and I took all the drugs that I read to you a few minutes ago
mm,
and had several treatments of electroconvulsive therapy. I also had 1 inpatient hospitalization and 1 outpatient hospitalization. And I remember at some point in '97, I began to feel good and just stay there. I didn't relapse. I didn't go back down. And at that point, I knew that I wanted to get out of my marriage, but I still had the severe migraine and I knew I couldn't work. So I kept trying to heal the headache and kept trying to do things to heal the headache. And by 2000, in January of 2000, I had a car accident on Route 70, which is an expressway, and I swerved across the road 5 times and crashed into a guardrail. And I fell asleep, obviously. And I was terrified that I could have hurt somebody, but I didn't. I didn't hurt anybody. I hurt the car a little bit, and I was okay. So I just went on about my life, and I just kind of tucked it away. I really was in denial about this car accident. And a few weeks later, I was driving through the city. I used to volunteer at Hopkins in Baltimore, and I was going to visit my parents, and I was driving through the city, and it was a very warm January afternoon. The car was filled with sunshine, the heat was on, and I woke up, crashed into the back of a van and woke up with an airbag in my chest. So that accident I didn't ignore. That's the one that where I went home that night and called an energy healer because my friend had told me that the energy healer was the most profound healing she'd ever had, and I knew at that after 2 accidents, I knew that Western medicine was not helping my headache and that I could have killed somebody. And I didn't wanna be that person like the proverbial drunk who kills somebody, but they walk out of the car. I didn't wanna be that person. So I started working with an energy healer in January of 2000, and by May of 2000, she had me off of all the headache medicine, and the pain was gone.
Wow.
And yes, I wasn't keeping a journal at that time. I wish I had because my memory is foggy for exactly what process we went through. I know I worked with my headache doctor because I was on methadone at the time,
Mm.
oral pills, methadone. And I know I worked with that doctor to cut that drug down, but all the rest of it is kind of a blur. And so once I got rid of the headache pain, there was one more incident of verbal abuse with my ex-husband, and I just knew the marriage was over.
Mm. And then things started improving, making these major changes to your circumstances, relieved of the headaches. And then at what point did you start tapering and coming off of psychiatric drugs?
That was when it was 2002 when I was teaching at Maryland, and my students started
Mm.
researching overprescription of SSRIs. And I read Glenn Mullen's book and just said, I'm not taking these anymore. And I worked with my therapist. I got off the drugs. I went to see my psychiatrist, and I tried to talk to him about Glenn Mullen's book, and he completely shut me down. He
Mm.
said he'd never heard of him, that I wasn't taking Prozac anyway. So what was I worried about? That Prozac was a good drug. He used it with lots of people, and that I should. I also write poetry. He said, well, you should just stick to writing poetry and let me stick to the drugs. And I said, "Well, it's my body and it's my life, and I'm not willing to do this anymore." And he said, "Well, you have a damaged brain, and if you stop taking drugs, you'll be sicker than you've ever been before."
Oh my
And I
gosh.
said, "Yeah, a damaged brain." I should have said, "Thank you very much."
Mhm.
But I thought, no, I don't have a damaged brain. I'm fine and I'm walking away from this. And I said, okay, if I ever get depressed again, I'll have to figure out what to do, but I'm not taking these drugs anymore.